this is a group that remits over $100 billion a year to India. Last year was $110 billion. So it's not just money coming from Gulf country workers sending money back to their families. Over time, over the past 2 decades, the money has changed from that type of money coming in to the Western diaspora investing in India itself. The most recent example, I don't know if you saw DLF just sold 1,000 apartments in Gurgaon, right? They sold out, I think, in 3 days. But 250 apartments were bought by diaspora. Just think of the amount of money coming in as investments in real estate. That's just one element, right? There's investments coming into startups, investments coming into the stock market. India is the strongest performing stock market in the past 2 years. More money is flowing in there. And so I think there's this great relationship between the diaspora and India. And the diaspora only, in my mind, will continue to grow in stature because it's 30 million today. But there are 3 forms of migration that is happening with the diaspora, at least in my mind, and I'll have our eminent think tanker comment on it afterwards. But in the past, migration happened when conquest happened. If you look at every form of migration, it was some country going and invading or colonizing another country, right? But I think the Indian diaspora is doing it very differently. We have several sets of migration going on. Of course, in the old days, we sent indentured labor in the colonial times to different countries. That was the first migration. But the new migration has been during Y2K, the IT migration happened to many countries. Then, now when you look at it, the student migration is happening. Between the US, Canada, UK, and Australia, there are hundreds of thousands of students going, studying overseas, and then staying back in those countries, because all those countries want qualified immigrants to work in their countries. So that's the second form of migration. There's a third form of migration that's going to happen in the next decade or so, and this is because the Western countries and Japan are declining in their age, are increasing their age and declining in fertility, right? So these countries, and I'm told one of the projections says Japan by 2050 will be half the size. They're 125 million now, it could be 60 million. But they're going to need a lot of geriatric care, doctors, nurses. Where's this talent going to come from? So you can look at another form of migration going to Western countries where they need geriatric care, right? So you see Indian diaspora maybe going from 30 million to 50 million in another 10 to 20 years, right? And so you can see that India and the Indian diaspora have developed a new model in the world that has not been explored before and can have its own challenges as well. So that's kind of the backdrop of the rising influence of the diaspora in India as we see in the world order today, right? Those are my brief opening remarks. I'll now move on the session to the rest of the panelists, and then we'll save some time for Q&A from all of you in the audience. Okay. Next up, we have Aparna Pandey to my left. She is with a leading think tank institution called Hudson, and she wrote a bestseller in 2020 called Make India Great, and I added the word again to it, and she said, no, it says Make India Great. So without further ado, Aparna, your remarks, and you can use the microphone.
Hello. I do think I can project my voice without the mic, but I'll still use the mic. I'd like to start by thanking the Indiaspora, MR and Sanjeev for inviting me here today, and all of you for coming. It's great to be on the panel with such eminent people. It's the world's most populous country and the fastest emerging economy. 2023 cemented India's position on the global high table. An August sort of global attitude survey, 2023, showed that 43% of the population in around 26 countries around the world held a favorable view of India. India's the year of India, as many of you was called, basically started in December 2022, when India was president of the UN Security Council. In January, India hosted the Global South Summit. In March, India was in Japan as an invitee for G7. and then the Quad Leaders Summit. Over summer, there were the summits for Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS, and then September 2023 G20 and President Biden's visit. All of you know all of this, but why does it matter? It matters because for about 77 years, the aim of India's foreign policy has been a multipolar world order. That may still not have been achieved by now, but let's say we are as close to it as we could be in the last 77 years. Even with the global situation that we currently live in, where they're not two separate blocks like we had in the Cold War era, where you had to choose one. Rather, you have two different countries vying and wooing everybody else. And there's a massive chunk of countries in the middle. You can call it Global South, you can call it Northwestern countries, you can call it former developing countries. And that grouping has, by default, have a leader. China is vying for that position, but its historical leader has been India. And so India is being wooed and will continue to be wooed in the coming years, primarily because of not just its geostrategic location, its population, its democracy, its economy, and its military, but because of geopolitics. And so India has this, I'd say, 10-year window when there's a lot that we can achieve, but sort of, one would need to take advantage of what has happened and the current situation. Why is India a natural leader, and why does India have an influence at the global stage? Why are we even talking about India at Davos? Not because there are various states which have prevalence here, but because countries are interested, companies are interested, and people are interested in India. It's a post-colonial country. It is a country which managed to remain sort of democratic, no military rule. It doesn't send its army or its military to other parts of the world. It's a founding member of the United Nations, a founding member of almost every international organization, and it's part of all the minilateral and multilateral arrangements in the world. It has a rising middle class, which almost every corporate around the world would like to be its consumer. It also has the diaspora that MR just mentioned. That diaspora matters if you look at the CEOs, not just the CEOs, those are important, no offense, but it's also everybody else in, the professors and the teachers, the students, the culture which is exported from food to yoga to all of that. And all of that has created this image and helped India become the center. And why, how is it playing into global geopolitics? Since the end of the Second World War, US grand strategy and that of its partners and allies has primarily been to ensure that there is no other country which rises and competes. So there's the need for an American preeminence in the world, which is bolstered by partnerships and alliances. That has started to face pushback in the last decade or so from the rise of China, its military and economic rise, and its desire for a China-led Asian and global order. In that context, countries matter, not just countries who are allies like Japan, Australia, entire NATO, UK, but countries which are not allies, which will be great partners, but which sit in a place in a part of the world and which can actually be the China plus one, or not necessarily alternative, but the different model is how I like to refer to it. The different model at every level, not necessarily an alternative. And India's growth over the last 77 years has shown that remained a democracy despite problems and challenges. Educated people, literacy rate of 75%. It has sort of, built this infrastructure, moved from a Fabian socialist economy to a free market economy. And achievements for a country which at independence only 11% were literate. And you didn't really have any private capital. You didn't have many universities and education available. To today being a country which is being considered as the next global power, not just a regional power. I will actually stop here and back to you, and happy to answer.
Thank you. Thanks, Aparna. That was a good overview of the Indian side. Just a few more comments on the diaspora side, since you brought that up in your thing as well. We have at the Diaspora website a list of 60 CEOs of the Fortune 500. So again, we punch way above our weight, right? We're 1% of the US population, but we're literally 12% of the Fortune 500 CEOs. What impact does that have positively on India as an investment scenario, right? Same thing with philanthropists or politicians. There were 250 politicians of Indian origin in 15 countries, and there are over a dozen prime ministers and presidents of Indian origin in many countries. So again, all these are different ways that the diaspora can help influence the growth of India and the relationship with India, and I think that has to be considered in this dynamic. But now, Invest India is where we're having this session, so we are fortunate to have the Joint Secretary of DPIT, Mr. Balmurugan, here. I'd like him to make a few remarks on what India is all about, investment in India is all about, and what India has in store in terms of 2024 and beyond.
Thank you. Historically, diaspora's influence is well known, not recent years, and from time immemorial. Indians went all over the world and made mark in all spheres, and we have evidence for that. And in recent years, as moderator said, we are making a huge mark, and Indian diaspora is having a huge influence in all spheres: social, cultural, political, and then economic. Relationship between India and the country where our Indian diaspora is living in a huge number. And also, diaspora went for seeking job and then for livelihood, and right now Indian diaspora is creating job opportunities in millions outside. That's a kind of transformation and then the kind of influence Indian diaspora is having at this point in time, and it is going to grow in a positive way. And from a migration which happened, forceful migration, which we have different terminology. Right now they are going on their own term, and they have that kind of stature right now. As far as I'm just giving government perspective. Yesterday also in a panel discussion I mentioned about few things, and Indira ji also, Aparna ji also mentioned that the kind of stable growth India has seen that led to India becoming 5th largest economy and then aspiring to become 3rd largest before 2030, and moving from 3.2 trillion economy to 32 trillion economy. And some of the measures which India has taken are remarkable, not in isolation, but in a very, very orchestrated, in a very comprehensive manner. Starting from, for example, business reforms which took place in recent years. You can talk about ease of doing business, where the kind of policy measures and then removal of all the restrictions, doing away with all those unnecessary requirements, and then coming out with national single window system, creating a facilitation center in small ministries to promote investment. That resulted in massive flow of FDI in 21-22. We touched 85 billion of FDI inflow coming inside India, and it is going to grow in same way. And again, for business across the world, nobody can ignore India anymore. That is a kind of huge market India offers, not only market, and also offer a place you can set up your manufacturing base. I mentioned only about ease of doing business reforms which undertook, which is taking place. It's work in progress. I would not say it is perfect. We have so much to do, and it is government with strong leadership, showing consistent policies. And one of the important thing is we listen to business, everyone, people, and then people who are doing business, common public, all their inputs are taken, and then the kind of policy reforms which are happening in India is exemplary in nature. That is the reason that India became a bright spot in recent years. You can see in the kind of situation we have, the kind of things we have seen, particularly starting from 2019 when pandemic happened that disrupted world supply chain and then halted the entire world. How quickly India bounced back? It bounced back very quickly because we had the kind of policies. To give some of the examples where India is leading and continue to lead, fintech. I was in a different country. I would not name the country. They themselves told me, we used to be the leaders, and India is 10 years ahead when you compare with my country in terms of technology, particularly mobile technology, fintech technology. You must be knowing, but I would want to say that in front of everyone that it takes 30 seconds right now to use your mobile UPI to transfer money from one bank to other bank. Unthinkable, and we have close to 800 million people having internet connectivity in their mobile, and it is going to grow. And second example, the kind of e-commerce opportunities which has been created because of our digital public interface, Digital India initiatives. You all must be knowing, and the kind of robust digital public infrastructure that I would definitely would like to mention. Everyone knows about Aadhaar, and everyone knows about other huge public digital infrastructure existing in India, like UPI. Again, these two are extraordinary in nature. The speed in which these reforms were rolled out, and also the scale, the number. And again, to give quickly on telecom sector, the tele density right now we have reached almost 86% overall. Urban is more than 100% in rural areas also. Again, where I would like to briefly tell about 5G rollout. India has seen fastest rollout of 5G technology in the world. These things are possible because we are having consistent policies, and government is committed in helping industry and also helping everyone to grow. And we have yesterday also I mentioned about it. I should mention the kind of multimodal connectivity which is getting developed in India in a very, very integrated way. We have tools like PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan, which is aiming to improve logistics efficiency. We came out with the logistics cost report, which we found it is less than 10%. And then even in the World Bank ranking of logistics index, we moved 8 places ahead. Only in few years, we have national logistics policy. There are so many things, these kind of initiatives I can mention. The kind of work we are doing in energy transition. We have a net zero target 2070, and also we have a 40% of energy coming from renewable energy by 2030, and we are 4th largest producer of renewable energy, both wind and solar. We are again having this policy of using all the multilateral institutions to forge alliance and to see how these things. For example, we are part of Solar Alliance. So all these things are happening, and what I'm trying to say is that at this point in time, India is a very, very interesting place to come and invest, and not only come and invest, and the Indian companies are also going in big number and then creating opportunities and then investing outside. and also a lot of work is happening in innovation field. So with all these things, India is marching ahead to reach this target of achieving a developed nation target by 2047, when we want to see our per capita income also going 10 times from close to $2,500 per capita right now to 25,000 and reaching 32 trillion. And I'm sure everyone is going to play a positive role and then part of this extraordinary journey. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Again, thank you for that update on India and the potential in India. One more thing on the diaspora to note before I go to our next speaker is, I said that 30 million people in the diaspora around the world. The major centers obviously are US, Canada, UK, Singapore, UAE, and Australia, which contain about 12 million out of the 30 million people. And we have someone representing the United States here as our next speaker. He's an entrepreneur. He started a tech company, very successful healthcare tech company called Access Healthcare. He also has a venture capital fund called Paro Jain. We have Anurag Jain as our next speaker. Anurag?
Amara, I wish my mom was, my grandmother was here to listen to you. Give my background, but
Is the mic on?
is the mic on? Can you guys hear me?
Turn on the switch.
Switch it on. That's better, right? Okay. I'm a technologist, like Amar just said, right? So every industry reaches a point of singularity. And if you look at the definition of singularity, what does it mean? It means a set of forces that come together that create basically growth that cannot be taken backwards. So you go back to mobile phones about 7 or 8 years ago, and they took off, right? You talked about 800 million people in India having mobile phones. You probably have 3 billion phones around the world. So it's hard to say whether it was cheap data, cheaper phones, apps, software, or the need of people that caused that to happen. Point is, a whole set of things kind of collided together and made that happen. And I think India is at that point today, where it's hard to tell what is driving it, but there's a whole set of factors that are colliding and sort of working on top of each other. So you don't have the push and pull in the past. Some things went forward, some things went backward. When you reach a point of singularity, things just move forward altogether. So what do I mean by that? If you double click onto that, I have sort of 3 reasons. There are 100 reasons. You've heard a lot of them today, but I'll take 3 sort of broad areas. Intrinsic, so something inherent to that country that won't change. 2 is the demographics, which you guys will all hear about, a lot more about. And the 3rd thing is policy. So I want to talk about each one of these areas from my perspective. So what is intrinsic? The first thing intrinsic about India is consumption. Any economist will tell you that for a country to sustainably go forward, you need internal consumption. Today, India is based on 60% is internal consumption. I don't want to name the country, but there's large countries around here that are basically based on state consumption. The state forces consumption. But here it is the average individual that's consuming. Now, the fact that I have young people and they're being born and they're growing, that helps me create this virtuous cycle, right? If you double click underneath the consumption, urban growth is slight, though it'll grow 3.5 times by 2030, rural growth will go by 4.3 times. So that is even better because it creates, sort of creates this band-aid against any foreign macro shocks that might be there because you have your own country growing. And my family owns a hotel in India. 10 years ago, most of the people that showed up were India were diaspora. Today, the people that show up are local people that can afford the money to show up, and that's the real sustainable growth for any country. So that's number 1. Number 2 was innovation. So there's enough internal innovation, whether it's the moon lander, whether it's vaccine rollout, or whether it's whatever, that's now coming to the fore that we can take forward, and we can actually export that to the rest of the world versus just being internally. So innovation engine is extremely important. The 3rd thing is actually diversity. So most Western economies are based on largely services growth. But if you look at a double click on India, it's services, it's agriculture, and it's industrial. And all of them are growing. And no one is more important than the other, and no one is so important that they sort of overshadow the other. I would say service is important, but service is important for all economies around the world. So you really can't take that away from them. And lastly, within that intrinsic is the investments in infrastructure. So you see the government making significant investments in infrastructure. What does that do? That creates a highway between rural and urban. More people you enable, more consumption you create, and it becomes a virtuous cycle. So sort of a set of intrinsic reasons why India will dominate in the next decade, right? The second one is my favorite subject, which is demographic development. Median age in India is 28. And if you go to 2030, it only goes to 31. China will be at 42, America will be at 40. So we have this amazing set of people that we're bringing online that are young, that can work, and they can consume. So that's a cycle that's hard to replicate. They can both work and consume, and by the way, like Emma says, we can export them. We can put them all over the world. These are the guys and girls that are becoming CEOs of different companies or of different sectors. It's not just one sector. You find them everywhere, all over the world. And that probably is a driving factor that almost nobody has. Maybe Nigeria has a version of it, but no other country can add education and English to some extent to that, it becomes unbeatable competitive advantage. The last point is policy. And policy has two sides to it. Positive policy, which is creating the right set of conditions for commerce to thrive fiscally. So, and underneath that, for me, SMB is very important. So, you look at any country that develops a small companies growing and thriving is extremely important. Last year, 130 small companies went public, $25 billion in venture capital. It shows you that the right set of economic conditions are being created for small industry to thrive. I'm not talking about large guys. I'm not saying that that's not important. I'm just saying the smaller guys are the real engine of growth, and that's coming. So that's a positive policy, right? You talk about geopolitics. You're right in the middle. You talk about being booed. You're in the middle of every geopolitical discussion. There is no geopolitical discussion in the world when India is not in the middle of that. So that. But there's another side of policy, which is to take away the negative policy. So what you talked about earlier, which is to take away the stuff that's no longer important and make it easier for people to thrive. So there's both sides of it. And I said, I don't want to talk about policy that much because the expert is sitting right there, so I'm going to look at her and she'll talk about it. But basically, we've reached that escape velocity now because of intrinsic growth, because of policy, and because of our demographic development.
Thank you, Anurag. So we have plenty of time for Q&A. I'll kind of ask the first question. One of the things with India that could be a challenge is sustainable growth, right? The Indian economy is growing at 6% plus growth. The population is still growing. How do you make this grow sustainably in light of climate change and those kinds of issues? Any thoughts on that, Aparna or Joint Secretary or Anurag? Any thoughts on that? Yeah, please.
Talk about policy.
Please. Yeah.
It's that is a challenge at one level every government is facing. India is not the only government. Every country on the world has to face that. The challenge that India will face is that it will not get any leading. It has to grow its economy. It has to protect its environment. It has to bring in more women into the workforce. It has to deal with a geostrategic and global geopolitical environment which can change any time, from Ukraine crisis one year to Middle East the other year, third. And it has to keep sort of also provide things to its growing population. So I say it's a challenge. Can the Indian government deal with it? Yes, but they will need to plan. One of my demands always has been that India needs to do better planning. Not a body which plans within the government, but planning for the next 20 years. 20 years from now, this is what the Indian population will look like, and this is what we need to prepare. This 20 years from now, these rivers won't have water, or there will be fewer rains. This is what we need to do from now. If 20 years from now, what do we do on any of these fronts? That is something that India will need to do a little more than other countries, because some of them have already have people with a certain per capita, and we don't have that drive or that need as much as India does.
Anybody else? Please.
That's very true. No country is afford to wait. It's not any more than what we used to always read in books that the impact of climate change is going to be. We have particularly we are seeing front of our eyes, the kind of impact it is creating. So that's the reason, though a country like India is not primarily responsible for the kind of global warming which we are witnessing, but at the end of the day, we are all together addressing. One other thing, I mentioned briefly is the energy transition plan which India is aiming for. Okay, we have a very clear laid out plan to reach 40% of the total energy coming from renewables by 2030 and net zero by 2070. And we are having an ambitious green hydrogen mission. A lot of effort is being made. And also apart from that, I would like to particularly mention about, it is also about how we conduct ourselves, how we need to inculcate some of the things in our life. This initiative by Honorable Prime Minister Life, that is also respecting environment, and then from use and throw, from that concept to go to circular economy. A lot of work is happening. Of course, it is just a beginning, and I'm sure the kind of focus which we are having to move to EV vehicles to reduce pollution, and also the reforms in agricultural economy. So all these things that you mentioned, we need to bring in more and more women into workforce. The largest network I would like to mention to the audience, that in India, we have one biggest self-help group program on women. Close to more than 8 crore families are part of that network, wherein particularly it is through them also, it is a huge network, the impact of environment, how we need to care for our environment, all these things are being done. And again, just to close, these are all the small information you may not be knowing, but all very important. For example, water conservation. There's an ambitious plan to save water, conserve water, and then to promote water harvesting technologies. A lot of efforts are being made in a very systematic manner. I'm sure together everyone will succeed in addressing this global problem. Thank you.
Anurag?
I think about sustainable from a slightly different perspective, right? So sustainable growth comes from consumption inside the country. We talk about 60% consumption. Right? So there are two demographics that I think will lead to future consumption. One is women. We talked about women, but let's take about numbers. 438 million women in India, 343 million in the unorganized sector. So as we create better and fairer policies for these women to migrate into the organized sector and add more value to the economy, there's a whole amount of value that has yet to be unlocked. Given that we were one of the first countries to have a woman prime minister, and we've got this sort of equality back in our DNA, I don't think that's that difficult. I know it's hard, we struggle through it. But if we make it happen, that will create a different level of growth that we haven't seen yet. That's one. The second one is rural growth. So again, we said long-term growth, rural India grows faster than urban India. And as we create infrastructure, as we create bridges, we create highways, as that rural economy comes online, it creates another layer of growth that we haven't even thought about yet in our numbers.
Love to take questions from the audience. Yes, let's get a mic.
Thank you. So my grandfather came from Fiji and then to London. My mother was born in London, so I'm probably third generation diaspora. But never in my life have I been as proud to be connected to India. In fact, I don't think there's a difference anymore. That's how we feel that living bridge. And I run 3 organizations all linked to India. One is called Arjun Global, another is called Yada Yoga, and the most important is called Go Dharmic. And that's a humanitarian non-profit where we're trying to connect Indian values with the world. And I feel like with climate change where it is, and all of these global challenges that we're facing, if you look at ideas like non-violence, ahimsa, so important and crucial on the world stage right now to present and provide thought leadership in these areas. Vasudeva Kutumbakam. It's this, I was in a debate recently here, and it was peace in the Middle East. and the room was full of anger and, difficulty. What contribution can India make in that room for the benefit of the world? And Loka Sangraham, these ideas from Gita and traditions that we have, all of these messages of universal welfare for all. I think it's a really exciting time to share these wonderful ideas, not just for the benefit of inbound, India, but for the whole world, the benefit of universal flourishing. And everybody I speak to, my friends, when they come to India on holiday, they love the warmth, the hospitality of the people. It's one of always favorite holidays, and people always share that. But what they take away is that warmth. And I feel that the world requires a little bit more of that. And I'd love to hear some of the thoughts. We've heard a lot about, kind of the business opportunity. What about on the soft power of Dharma, exporting these ideas of universal compassion and love and meditation and yoga?
Great question. Again, a couple of answers to that. One is that Prime Minister Modi did something wonderful a few years ago by creating the International Yoga Day. Right? And that's growing in stature every year in different countries. Same way, there are a lot of people like Sri Ravi Shankar who are teaching meditation and art of breathing. And so a lot of this is happening. It has to happen organically, but I think it is manifesting itself in many different ways, but maybe not to the extent we'd like to see it, but it is definitely spreading in any country I visit. And I visit a lot of countries every year. I think yoga and meditation always comes up when you meet non-Indians as something they can connect with. But anyway, yeah, please.
So Amar, you had that Indiaspora event in Austin. So a couple of us got together and we were having a deep discussion. We said, what do Indians, forget Indians, whether diaspora, whether India, what do they bring to the world? And if you look at the two fundamental constructs of business that we have seen in the past 100 years, socialism and capitalism, right? And both have their challenges. So I think there is an answer in the middle, which is sort of conscious capitalism. And I think if you look at the DNA, if you look at the background of what India brings, it is capitalism, but with that other light, with that rainbow light around it, which I think is what India will bring to the world in the future. That's our belief.
I'm one of those who believes that India's soft power dates back actually centuries. It's not new. And sort of, and we can see it in examples. You travel anywhere in Africa, especially East and South Africa. The teachers have been Indian. The nurses are Indian. So there is an indigenous Indian population, but you meet anybody like in US, when I meet people from Ethiopia or from Nigeria or Kenya, they have had Indian friends, they've had Indian teachers, they've had Indian nurses. They've got scholarships to go and travel to India and study there. That goes back decades. Second, Emma mentioned the yoga and third is India gives a lot of developmental assistance. And India has been giving developmental assistance since the 50s and 60s. India may have been taking money from World Bank and IMF, but India gave back, and it gives countries as well. It has programs all across Africa, in Latin America, it has in the Indian Ocean Islands, in Southeast Asia, all across South Asia, with one exception. All other countries in South Asia get developmental assistance, economic assistance, emergency assistance from India. So all of that is soft power. I don't believe that we need governments to do it. I believe it comes from society, it comes from people like you, from MR and Indiaspora, comes from corporates. That's how soft power grows. That people have heard about India, people have interacted with somebody from India or something which comes out of India.
Yes. If you could pass the mic.
So I'm a professor at the University of Michigan and have a startup that's more sciencey than techy. So my question is a little different from where the discussion has gone. So could you speak, when you talk about knowledge creation and cutting edge research, I think there are some things that we are proud of right now, and it's some things that we're kind of falling behind. So any comments on that side of the equation?
It's very important to become developed country, that particular area we need to really work on. And you know that most of the tech companies, big companies in the world are having their R&D centers in India. I was told almost 29% of the that kind of centers are located in India, Bangalore and Mandara. And to keep that, to preserve and then grow, we need to do things consistently, and I'm sure Government of India is doing that, and then Indian private companies are also doing it, and we need to really ramp up our expenditure on R&D also. That is also happening, and we have consistent policies. We have a startup policy also to promote innovations and then creating this knowledge base. We have Atal Innovation Mission from Niti Aayog also towards this, and particularly new education policy which came out recently is also revolves around this concept, particularly what you said. So that policies also recently came out, and I'm sure in a decade or so we'll be seeing significant impact in that particular area.
And just to add to that, I think two things. One is in the technology in the area of, let's say, citizenship services like Aadhaar and banking and all that. I think India is a leader and can definitely export something like that in an open system standards, right? But in the AI space, I think what you're alluding to is
Science.
and science. The percentage of R&D investment by companies and government is far less in terms of a percentage than other governments. But on the other hand, India is able to innovate at lower cost as well. Like the Chandrayaan mission cost 75 million, the equivalent US mission would cost $1 billion, right? So I think you have to look at that percentage of GDP as cost of doing innovation as well. So some of that is there, but in terms of AI, I don't think there's an equivalent to OpenAI or any of those products, nor is there an equivalent to what China has done in terms of LLMs and stuff. I think that's one area that India could add more investment and could use some more government policy help in order to create more of that AI infrastructure rather than just rely on OpenAI or Google and other foreign products to be the basis of the AI systems in India. That's one area I think they can do more. Yes.
One point, one question. Firstly, my name is Sohail. I'm based in Zurich, so in your definition, part of the diaspora. I've been here for the last 10 years. Firstly, don't say too much nice things about India because it might force us to come back and then you have a problem of plenty, right? To manage. So that's one thing, right?
Nazar na lag jaye.
Exactly, nazar na lag jaye, right? I really like the point Anurag made on intrinsic value. I think it's a very underestimated measure of competitiveness, right? I mean, having said that, some of the intrinsic value, in my opinion, is also government-led. I mean, by putting money in the hands of the population, whether through direct money or even some of the rational and all the schemes that government is doing. Perhaps it's a bit artificial, but I think it's really a great way to kind of bring more kind of power in the hands of ordinary citizens. What I want to check or rather ask was, how can we do more about that? Because still the saving rates in India are much higher compared to other economies. And just like me, I mean, I come from a Gujarati family and we believe in a lot of savings, right? But how can you unlock much more of that and bring it back into the economy? What are the avenues that maybe we should focus more to increase the intrinsic consumption that we're talking about? I'm sure the money spent will be money used and will come back, eventually in one way or the other. So just one point and one short question. While we are doing great on services, manufacturing, what is the aim to really move up the ladder when it comes to really the high-end stuff, precision engineering for that matter? I live in Switzerland and it's all about precision engineering, right? So what is the roadmap? We're going to get there eventually, maybe it's 10 years, 20 years from now, but we can't be staying, anyways, you got to get my point, yeah? So just any comments on these two topics there?
I think maybe Anurag and then I'd let the Joint Secretary as well.
So talk about intrinsic consumption, and I might slightly disagree with you, and I'll tell you my view. When COVID hit America, I was standing in the food bank line, giving somebody food, and this lady walked up to me and I said, "What is the one thing you would do differently if you knew about COVID?" And she said, "I'd learn how to save." So I don't want to take away the fact that Indians save a lot today. I want to grow despite that. I don't want to take away from that saving rate because it can have other impacts. That's my personal view.
Yeah, one thing is, you might want to touch upon, when he said that, what are we doing in terms of the PLI schemes and some of the things? Will that help improve India's stature and competitiveness?
Of course, India is doing a great deal of policy initiatives, including the PLI in 14 sectors, close to 28 billion, and that already helped. For example, we never thought, not only policy, and then it used to take a lot of time for companies to announce and then actually set up their shop. If you see in recent years, Micron is already the groundbreaking happened, and then they are almost going to produce. And then recently we have a solar panel manufacturing unit also coming up in Tamil Nadu recently. Yes, we have challenges, but again, I would like to mention this one. We have very, very potential and then dynamic MSMEs which are doing a lot of work in this precision manufacturing also. One of the things which we need to promote is that they need to find good partners. And one example I would like to give is, since you are from Germany, we have this partnership with Germany where managed training program where selected people who are showing interest from India get trained in Germany, and then they are facilitated to have partners where this technology is also getting. Of course, it's work in progress. I don't have specific numbers, but I do know a lot of examples where in precision engineering also small companies doing great work, doing job work for big companies across the even for aerospace engines. A lot of parts are being manufactured in India. I think we are going to make rapid progress there also.
Yes. Go ahead. Sir. You have the mic.
Please.
My name is S.P. Reddy. I'm from Atlanta. I moved to, after spending 22 years, I moved to Hyderabad about 15, 16 years back. I made various investments in healthcare, technology, startups, life sciences, and hotels. In last 16 years, the transformation that has taken place, it's amazing and mind-boggling. I never ever thought India would make a fighter jet. Never ever thought, we could send Chandrayaan. I never ever thought, we would make the carrier ship, the thing we call the. So from the Make in India program, which was announced a few years back by the Prime Minister, I feel the Indian diaspora across the world and this organization, how could you influence major manufacturing companies globally to set up shops in India, as he said, using those precision things. So the Make in India is a great, I think the Prime Minister's goal is to manufacture most of the defense equipment right here in India. In fact, last month, I think the defense minister has announced X number of components that could be manufactured in India. So what's your thought on the question, Mr. Secretary? Where do you see next 10 years Make in India? Will we stop importing major, even chip manufacturers, so.
Yeah, thank you. Just see behind you, and we are number 2 in manufacture of mobile phones probably. And then recent month we crossed 5 billion in mobile manufacturing export. It was close to 3.2 billion last year. We are doing great, and then of course I would always say this work in progress, and we are in a right path. Make in India made a great progress, and then that helped India to bring in many manufacturers to come and set up their shops We have plenty of examples. It's going to happen in much bigger way, considering two aspects. One is the kind of global supply I already mentioned in 2019 when it took place, and countries across the world understood over reliance on one particular value chain, how disruptive it is. And India is providing that base, and we are doing a lot of things. And one example I would like to, I never mentioned about it, we are having ambitious program called National Industrial Corridor Development Program, through which we have identified 11 corridors and 32 nodes manufacturing smart townships where the people can come and set up the shops. It's a plug and play infrastructure. You have everything there, and also the approvals also comes easy. Only thing is, they need to see. Again, it is connected by multimodal connectivity. We have multimodal logistics parks coming up in the same area. We have around 4 such manufacturing zones fully functional. Many not only actually it is a government initiative, we have public-private partnership also. We have in recent years many private players also setting up these kind of manufacturing zones. We have Mahindra, we have Sri City, we have Reliance coming up with their own manufacturing. These are a few examples, and many initiatives I can say. For want of time, I just stopped.
One last question, then we have to wrap up.
Okay, my name is Chetan Trivedi. I'm into different sector, not in the technology, but in the travel sector. Living in Germany from 22 years. Now, my question is, when are we going to say that travel industry can be a travel industry, recognized as an industry? Because we are talking about 28 years of average age. And I see it, the travel industry is the industry which can employ all these people. Not manufacturing will take a lot of years to build a factory and employ people, but the travel industry, you switch it on and you start it. So what is the roadmap that we are looking at to bring in the travel industry in recognizing as a travel industry? And by that, we can also do is like my friend mentioned it, that we can provide the cultural travel where we can export all the values, what he was talking about, to the world, and the world can be a better place. So what is the roadmap for the travel industry?
To be precise, I don't have exact information, but I can say a few things because I do come across the kind of focus government want to give on tourism industry also, because it's one example I would say the kind of effort which government made that led to after COVID pandemic also, the number of people are visiting even places like Jammu and Kashmir. It's enormous. And more than that, the startup ecosystem is also coming out with a lot of initiatives that is helping people to easily access and then find out where they can come and stay. And then the other one I would like to, Incredible India, the initiatives taken by various governments. I would like to specifically mention about state government initiatives to promote tourism. Madhya Pradesh is doing a lot of work. Kerala, everyone knows about it. And across the country, these kind of initiatives are happening. I am sure, I don't have exact detail about the roadmap. Tourism Ministry is actually doing a lot of work on that front.
I want to wrap up now and have each panelist just give a 30-second concluding remarks. Just to kick that off, I want to say this. If you look at the promenade in Davos, there are at least, 6 states and Invest India. We want to thank Invest India for hosting this panel. But you can go, you can look at Tamil Nadu, you can look at Karnataka, you can look at Magnetic Maharashtra, we just saw them, and Uttar Pradesh. So there's so many states here on the promenade, and if you look at other countries, you don't see the same thing. You don't see different pavilions from China. You don't see different pavilions from other countries. So I think this is the time for India. It's a ride, and I want to leave it at that. But I want to just go around to Aparna first and make some concluding remarks.
I conclude by saying that that it's rare in the world to find example of a country which almost every other country wants that country to rise. And that's happening with India. Almost every country in the world wants India to rise, do well, become a leading power economically, militarily, on the soft power development front. And so there is that unique opportunity India has and Indians have. And the coming decade will show how well we and others use that opportunity.
Yeah, but of course, I would repeat the same thing. It's a exciting time, and then India is bright spot right now at the world stage, and then it's going to grow consistently. We are going to reach that path of achieving Viksit Bharat by 2047, and we're all invited to be part of it. An extraordinary journey.
Anurag?
So I grew up in India, and if you look at the biggest difference in India from when I grew up to today, it's not the infrastructure, it's not the money, it's not the consumption, it's the self-belief. And once you have that self-belief, nothing can get in your way, and that's where India is today.
Awesome. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Sanjeev Joshipura, who's the Executive Director of Indiaspora, to summarize the proceedings today.
Thanks, MR, and thanks, Anurag and Joint Secretary Balamurugan and Aparna. I've been given the difficult task by the organizers to really summarize. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take threads of what some of our speakers have said, flesh it out a little bit more, and then try and weave a strand among all of those. Before I do that, let me take a second to acknowledge a couple of people and their teams without whom this event would not have been possible at all. I see here sitting in the front row to my right, the India CEO and Asia leader of Indiaspora, Shri Kumar Nair. And from the Invest India side, I believe there's Bhushan and his team somewhere there in the back. Thank you. Okay, now at Indiaspora, MR started the panel by talking about the CEOs of Indian origin, the philanthropists, the government leaders, and so forth. And at Indiaspora, we are very keen on making sure that that kind of success is converted to positive influence in society, right? As MR said, we are about being a force for good. What is it that the CEOs are doing for job creation in India and outside? What is it that the philanthropists are doing in terms of helping India solve its problems? Being better, Anurag gave an example of being a distributor in a food bank in Dallas during the pandemic. Yeah, what is it philanthropists are doing in their own countries? The point I'm making here is that this is a virtuous cycle that we are riding. As India advances in the world, and it seems inexorable now, India's rise at this point, so also the success of the Indian diaspora is being amplified greatly. And that is a virtuous cycle that I think India and the Indian diaspora should keep utilizing over time. It's only an amplifying and an accelerating factor. Then the other thing I'll just mention is, it's often said that there was a time when India and China started at the same level of per capita GDP. Look at where China is today and look at where India is today. India is far behind. And there are lots of complicated discussions and debates about, is it because of system of governance? Is it because of some intrinsic qualities or lack thereof? But for a second, if we could just leave China out of the picture, just look at India by itself. Think of India in 1991 and where it was. And today in 2024, just look outside. We've talked about the pavilions. We've talked about the excitement at Davos about India. Look at where India has come in the short span of 33 years. Yeah. Other countries have taken longer. I know that there are examples in East Asia with economies that have gone in 3 or 4 decades from fishing villages to sort of areas where there are centers of commerce and finance in that region. India is not quite there yet, but India is not a country of 4 million people. There's a lot of complexities in India. So I think there's a lot to be said about just marveling about where India has come since the crisis period in 91. Now, talking about the governmental relationships and geopolitics, Aparna started with that. A couple of things on that. In the last 7 to 10 years, I would say the government-to-government relationships that India has with the United States, but also with other countries in Europe, have been exceptionally strong and are getting stronger, and are now at a point of maturity where differences, which are inevitable, will not derail the relationship. I think that is very important to note, because even just 12 or 15 years ago, spats between the US and India caused major close to derailments in the relationship. The Indian Prime Minister Modi has come to America a few times, and we've been involved in diaspora in arranging a lot of these events. One of the key agreements that was signed was the ISET agreement, the Critical and Emerging Technologies Agreement. The key to that sort of talks about the maturity of the relationship is the breadth across various sectors that ISET covers. It's not only semiconductors, it's not only defense, it's various aspects. So I think that's one. Second, we are sitting in Switzerland here today. Let's talk about some neighboring countries. Italy. The Prime Minister of Italy has visited India recently. Germany, the Chancellor has visited India. France, President Macron is a repeat visitor. So even with Europe, ties are getting stronger and stronger. Now, the other points I'd make is on the technology side that was frequently mentioned by the Joint Secretary, by MR and so forth. One of the things that Indiaspora works on is being a convener in the technology space for entrepreneurs, investors, and so on and so forth. A couple of areas I'd like to drill down in. When we talk to other countries which have a fairly large Indian diaspora, not as large as the 5 countries that MR mentioned, which we are very active in, but sort of a second tier below that. Look at Ireland, look at Fiji, look at Suriname, Trinidad, Panama. We've spoken to all of these countries where there are Indian diaspora. We've spoken to leaders in these countries where they are very interested in trilateral technology convenings. The Indians that reside in India, that are at the forefront of technology and investments in technology. The Indian diaspora in the United States, where every third startup, literally, is started by an Indian American, and people from that country. There are some countries that want to move up the value chain in entrepreneurship and investments, and that's why they want those collaborations. And there are other countries like Ireland, which want to be the technology hub for Europe, especially after Brexit. So that is their idea of having this convening with the Indian diaspora. So there's a lot of excitement in the technology realm as well. I'll just close by thinking of 2 or 3 questions that obviously, there are hundreds of questions, and in a complicated country like India, there are probably thousands of answers to those hundreds of questions. But just 2 or 3 that kind of I think about from time to time, and I'm sure all of you do as well. Anurag talked about demography and intrinsic consumption and all of that. He's spot on there in my opinion. The one thing that India does need to think about where there are challenges that are posed for the future is just the sheer volume in terms of number of jobs that need to be created as we move forward, as India moves forward as an economy. There have been discussions that have been had, including at Indiaspora and at our events and outside with eminent economists that talk about the pros and cons of job creation in services, manufacturing, and agriculture. Services, it's sort of a relatively small sector and a layer of people for whom that creates the jobs. Manufacturing, more sustainable over time, but takes a long time. The gestation period is very high. Also, is India at the right spot today in 2024 to copy some of the strategies that the East Asian economies used 40, 50 years ago? These are some open questions. I know PLI is a big parameter that is in favor of India, the production-linked incentives that helps India. But there have been questions about whether that's the right strategy overall. Agriculture, very important for self-sustainability, self-sufficiency. But does that negate the need for India to necessarily have some level of imports of agricultural produce? So there are some questions around that front as well. Second question, Aparna talked about China plus one. Strategically, what is it that India needs to do to make sure that it is indeed the default plus one? I know that there are some sectors in which India is there today, but there are some in which it is not. What is it that India can do to expand the breadth of sectors, the number of sectors in which it is the default answer to your +1 question? So these are some of my thoughts as I close out. But with that, I'd like to thank MR for moderating and our three stellar panelists. This has been a fantastic discussion, great questions from the audience, and hopefully our paths will cross over the next few days in Davos. Thank you.
Thank you.